I am Helen Marshall, 32, and I always knew my wedding day would be memorable, but not like this. Growing up with my perfectionist sister, Kimberly taught me to expect her disapproval, but nothing prepared me for what happened at the altar. "This wedding is a joke," Kimberly screamed, interrupting our vows. "You're marrying a waiter, Helen. How pathetic." As she stormed out in designer heels, James squeezed my hand and whispered, "Should we tell her who I really am?" I shook my head. The surprise would come later. Before I continue the story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments, and if you want to hear how my snobby sister got the shock of her life, hit subscribe right now. I grew up in Boston, in a family where appearances mattered more than authenticity. My parents, while not extremely wealthy, had enough money to maintain a facade of upper-middle-class perfection. My father worked as an investment banker, and my mother was a real estate agent who specialized in luxury properties. They valued status symbols, prestigious education, and proper connections above all else. My sister Kimberly, 3 years older than me, absorbed these values completely. From childhood, she was determined to climb as high as possible on the social ladder. She had a talent for identifying what would impress others and pursuing it relentlessly. When we were kids, this meant joining the most exclusive clubs, befriending the daughters of the wealthiest families, and constantly reminding me of how I failed to measure up to her standards. "Helen, you can't wear that to Brianna's party," she would say, eyeing my comfortable jeans with disdain. "Her father is on the hospital board with Dad. Do you want to embarrass the whole family?" That was Kimberly in a nutshell. Everything was a competition, and she always had to win. When I got an A on a test, she would remind everyone she had gotten an A+ on the same test 3 years earlier. When I made the swim team, she pointed out that she had been team captain. My achievements were stepping stones for her to showcase her superiority. As we grew older, the competition only intensified. Kimberly attended an Ivy League university, while I chose a smaller liberal arts college that had an excellent program in social sciences. This choice horrified my family. "Boston College has perfectly good programs," my mother had argued, "and the alumni network is so much more valuable." But I stood my ground. It was one of my first acts of rebellion against the path that had been laid out for me since birth. After college, Kimberly went straight into corporate finance, climbing the ranks rapidly and making sure everyone knew about each promotion and bonus. I, on the other hand, discovered my passion for education reform and joined a nonprofit that worked to improve access to quality education in underserved communities. "That's nice, dear," my mother said when I told her about my new job. "Though I'm not sure how you'll ever afford to live in a decent neighborhood on that salary." Kimberly was less subtle. "So basically, you'll be making in a year what I make in a month?" Bold choice, sis. By the time Kimberly was 30, she had achieved the life my parents had always envisioned. She married Ryan, a successful hedge fund manager who came from good family, meaning old money. They bought a sprawling house in the most exclusive suburb of Boston. Their wedding had been featured in a regional luxury magazine, with my parents beaming proudly in every photo. My dating history, meanwhile, was a series of relationships that inevitably crumbled under the weight of my family's expectations. I dated a doctor my parents approved of, but we had nothing in common. I tried dating a lawyer from my father's firm, but the relationship felt more like a business arrangement than a romance. Each time I brought someone home, they were subjected to subtle interrogations about their family background, career prospects, and financial stability. After my 30th birthday, I made a decision. I moved to New York City, taking a position with a larger education nonprofit that offered more responsibility and slightly better pay. Most importantly, it put 200 miles between me and my family's constant judgment. In New York, I built a life that felt authentic. My apartment in Brooklyn was small but charming. I made friends who valued me for who I was rather than what I represented. Tara, a graphic designer who lived in my building, became my closest friend. She had grown up in a working-class family in Chicago and had built her career through talent and determination rather than connections. "Your sister sounds like a nightmare," Tara said after I told her stories about my childhood. No offense. None taken, I assured her. She kind of is. My other close friend, Alyssa, worked at the same nonprofit. She had a sharp mind and an even sharper tongue, and she had no patience for pretension. You know what I love about you, Helen, she said once after we'd had a few too many glasses of wine. You could be one of those trust fund babies who pretends to care about social causes until daddy calls with a real job offer. But you're actually doing the work. For the first time in my life, I felt seen and appreciated for who I really was. I spoke to my family once a week, dutifully listening to updates about Kimberly's latest achievements and my mother's thinly veiled suggestions that I wasn't living up to my potential. But those conversations no longer defined me. I was finally becoming the person I wanted to be, not the person my family expected me to be. And that's when I met James. There was a small cafe 2 blocks from my office that made the best turkey club sandwich in all of New York City, at least in my opinion. I started going there regularly for lunch, usually with a book or work documents to review. It was a cozy spot with worn leather booths and charmingly mismatched dishware. The kind of place that felt like a secret even though it was always busy. On a rainy Tuesday in April, I was seated at my usual booth when a waiter I hadn't seen before approached my table. He was tall with dark hair and warm brown eyes that crinkled slightly at the corners when he smiled. Welcome back, he said, surprising me. Turkey club, light mayo, extra pickles on the side. Iced tea with lemon, right? I looked up, startled. How did you know my order? He grinned. I started last week. Marco pointed you out as a regular and made sure I memorized your usual. I'm James. By the way. Helen, I replied, inexplicably flustered. And yes, that's exactly what I want. Coming right up, Helen. There was something about the way he said my name. Something about his genuine smile that stayed with me long after I'd returned to the office. The next day, I found myself going back to the cafe, even though I'd brought lunch from home. James was there, and his face lit up when he saw me. Back so soon? Did we mess up your order yesterday? No, it was perfect, I admitted. I just had a craving, I guess. Over the next several weeks, I became an even more regular. James was always working the lunch shift, and we fell into a pattern of brief, but increasingly personal conversations. I learned that he was 34, had moved to New York from Chicago about a year ago, and lived in a tiny apartment in Queens with too many books and not enough shelves. What brought you to New York? I asked one day as he refilled my iced tea. A fresh start, he said, and something in his expression made me think there was more to the story. What about you? You don't strike me as a native New Yorker. Boston originally, I told him. And also looking for a fresh start, I guess. Looks like we have something in common then. It was a simple exchange. But I felt a connection forming between us, a recognition of something kindred. James was unfailingly kind to all the customers, but I couldn't help noticing that he spent a little more time at my table, that his smile seemed a little warmer when it was directed at me. One day, after about a month of these lunch encounters, I was getting ready to leave when James approached with my check. I hope this isn't inappropriate, he said, looking uncharacteristically nervous, but I get off at 3 today. There's a great coffee shop around the corner that isn't this one. Would you maybe want to meet me there? When I'm not wearing an apron and smelling like French fries. My heart did a little flip. I'd like that. The coffee shop was a tiny hole-in-the-wall place with incredible espresso and homemade pastries. James was waiting outside when I arrived, looking different in jeans and a simple blue button-down shirt, but just as appealing. This is weird, right? He said as we sat down with our coffees. Seeing each other in the wild like this. I laughed. A little. But good weird. It was the first of many coffee dates that eventually turned into dinner dates and museum visits and long walks through the city. James was intelligent and well-read, with thoughtful opinions on everything from urban education policy to obscure poetry. He never talked down to me or tried to impress me with fancy restaurants or expensive gifts. He was simply himself, genuine and unpretentious. Why a waiter? I asked him once, after he'd mentioned having a degree in business from Northwestern. I mean, not that there's anything wrong with it, but with your education. I know it seems strange, he acknowledged. Let's just say I reached a point in my life where I needed to step back and reevaluate my priorities. Working at the cafe gives me time to think, to figure out what I really want. And the people are great. It wasn't a complete explanation, but I didn't press. Everyone had their story, their reasons for the paths they'd chosen. Who was I to judge? When I'd walked away from the life my family had planned for me, when I told Tara and Alyssa about James, they were immediately supportive. He sounds wonderful, Tara said. When do we get to meet him? Is he cute? Alyssa wanted to know. Wait, don't answer that. Of course he's cute, or you wouldn't be getting all blushy talking about him. I arranged a casual dinner at my apartment for the four of us. I was nervous about how my friends would react to James, but I needn't have worried. He charmed them completely. Bringing a bottle of surprisingly good wine and engaging Tara in a detailed conversation about a graphic design exhibit he'd recently seen. Okay, he's perfect. Alyssa whispered to me in the kitchen as we cleared the dinner plates. Almost suspiciously perfect. What's the catch? There's no catch, I insisted. Though sometimes I wondered the same thing myself. James seemed too good to be true in many ways, and occasionally I caught glimpses of something more complicated beneath his straightforward exterior. Like the time we ran into a group of businessmen at a restaurant, and one of them clearly recognized James, but pretended not to when James nodded politely in his direction. Or the fact that despite his apparent financial limitations, James knew an impressive amount about fine wines and classical music. There were little inconsistencies that made me curious, but never enough to doubt his sincerity or the growing feelings I had for him. Whatever his past might hold, I was falling in love with the man who remembered how I took my coffee, who sent me text messages with quotes from books he thought I'd enjoy, who looked at me like I was the most fascinating person he'd ever met. And for now, that was enough. The next 6 months with James were like something from a dream, the kind where you're aware that it might end when you wake up, so you try to memorize every detail. We fell into an easy rhythm together, spending most evenings and weekends in each other's company. James continued working at the cafe, while I threw myself into a major fundraising campaign at work. What struck me most about James was his depth of knowledge. He could discuss Renaissance art with the same ease as he talked about contemporary politics or economic theory. When I mentioned this, he shrugged it off. I read a lot, he said simply. And I had good teachers. Was your family big on education? I asked, realizing I knew very little about his background. A shadow crossed his face. You could say that. My father had expectations. Like most parents, I guess. It was one of many moments when James deflected questions about his past, changing the subject with such natural grace that I often didn't notice until later. He never spoke about his parents in the present tense, and I assumed they had passed away or that the relationship was strained. Given my own complicated family dynamics, I understood the desire for privacy. Despite working as a waiter, James never seemed concerned about money. He lived simply, but there were moments that hinted at a different reality. Like when he took me to dinner for my birthday at an exclusive restaurant where getting a reservation typically required months of waiting. How did you manage this? I asked as we were escorted to a prime table overlooking the city skyline. Just got lucky with a cancellation, he said. But the maitre d' greeted him by name and treated him with a deference that seemed out of proportion for a casual diner. Then there was the time we bumped into his friend Michael at a bookstore. Michael was impeccably dressed in what I recognized as a very expensive suit, with the confident air of someone accustomed to wealth. Helen, this is my old friend Michael, James introduced us. We went to school together. So you're the woman who's been keeping Jamie too busy to return my calls, Michael said with a grin, shaking my hand. It's about time he found someone worth his time. How's the family business? James asked quickly, and I noticed a warning look pass between them. Thriving, no thanks to you, Michael replied cryptically. Father asks about you, you know. You should call him. The conversation left me with more questions than answers, but when I tried to ask James about it later, he was evasive. Michael exaggerates everything, he said. Always has. Since we were kids. His father and mine did some business together years ago, that's all. I decided not to push. After all, everyone had a right to their privacy, to reveal their past on their own terms. What mattered was that I was falling deeply in love with the man James was with me, not who he might have been before we met. And James, for his part, showed me every day that he was falling just as deeply. He listened when I talked about my work, offering insights that helped me develop stronger proposals for our education initiatives. He remembered small details, like my preference for daisies over roses and my irrational fear of pigeons. He made space for me in his life, reorganizing his tiny apartment to give me a drawer and part of his closet when I started spending nights there. 8 months into our relationship, on a crisp autumn Sunday, we were walking through Central Park when James suddenly stopped beneath a canopy of golden leaves. "I've been thinking," he said, taking both my hands in his. "My apartment is too small. And yours isn't much bigger. What if we looked for a place together? Something that could be ours from the beginning." My heart soared. "Are you asking me to move in with you?" "I'm asking us to build a home together," he clarified, his eyes serious. "I love you, Helen." "I've never been more certain of anything." "I love you too," I replied, realizing as I said it how completely true it was. Whatever mysteries surrounded James's past, I knew with absolute certainty that what we had was real. And yes, let's find a place together. We found a modest but charming 2-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn with large windows and built-in bookshelves that James immediately filled with his extensive collection. Living together revealed new dimensions to our relationship. I discovered that James was pathologically neat, folding his clothes with military precision. He learned that I couldn't function in the morning without at least 2 cups of coffee. We settled into domestic life with surprising ease, as if we had been designed to fit into each other's lives. I had never felt so comfortable, so accepted, so loved for exactly who I was. For the first time, I wasn't trying to live up to someone else's expectations or pretending to be someone I wasn't. There was just one shadow hanging over our happiness, the inevitable moment when I would have to introduce James to my family. I had mentioned him in calls with my parents, deliberately vague about his occupation and background. But as our 1-year anniversary approached, I could no longer put off the meeting. It was time for worlds to collide, and I was terrified of the explosion that might follow. I called my mother on a Sunday afternoon, James encouraging me with a supportive smile as I dialed. After exchanging the usual pleasantries and updates, I took a deep breath and dove in. "Mom, I've been seeing someone for almost a year now. His name is James, and it's serious. I'd like to bring him to dinner next time we visit." There was a pause on the line. "A year? And you're only mentioning him now?" I could hear the hurt in her voice, mixed with curiosity. "What does he do?" The question I'd been dreading. "He works at a cafe near my office." "That's where we met." Another pause, longer this time. "I see. Well, we'll look forward to meeting him." Her tone said everything her words didn't. I could practically see her mentally revising her expectations, preparing herself to be polite but not overly invested in a relationship she already assumed wouldn't last. When I hung up, James pulled me into a hug. "That bad, huh?" "Actually better than I expected," I admitted. "Though wait until my sister hears about it." I didn't have to wait long. My phone rang that evening with Kimberly's name flashing on the screen. "A waiter? Are you serious, Helen?" She skipped the greeting entirely. "Mom just told me about your new boyfriend. His name is James, and yes, he works at a cafe," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "He's wonderful and I love him." Kimberly's laugh was sharp. "Oh, honey, is this some kind of rebellion against the family? First the nonprofit job. Now dating service staff? What's next, moving to a commune? You know what, Kim? Not everyone measures success by the size of their bank account or the prestige of their job title." My voice was shaking with anger. "James is kind, intelligent, and he makes me happy. That's what matters to me." "Sure, until you want to buy a house or send kids to college," she retorted. "But you do, sis. Just don't expect Ryan and me to bail you out when reality hits." I was still seething when I joined James on the couch after the call. He took one look at my face and wrapped an arm around my shoulders. "Kimberly," he guessed, and I nodded. What did the charming sister have to say? I relayed the conversation. watching his face carefully for signs of hurt or anger. But James just shook his head, a small smile playing at his lips. "Your sister sounds exactly as advertised," he said. "Don't worry about me, Helen. I've dealt with people like Kimberly my whole life. I can handle a dinner." 2 weeks later, we took the train to Boston. I had booked a hotel, unwilling to subject James to staying in my childhood home, but my mother insisted we join them for dinner on Saturday night. As we dressed in our hotel room, I noticed James selecting his most understated clothes, a simple button-down shirt and khakis that gave no hint of his excellent taste. "You don't have to downplay yourself for them," I said, feeling a surge of protectiveness. James kissed my forehead. "I'm not. I'm just making sure they see me, not what I'm wearing." My parents' house looked exactly as it always had, a tasteful colonial in a prestigious neighborhood with perfectly maintained gardens. My father opened the door with a polite smile, eyes immediately assessing James. "You must be James," he said, extending his hand. "Walter Marshall. Welcome to our home." "Thank you for having me, sir," James replied, his handshake firm. "Helen speaks highly of you and Mrs. Marshall." My mother appeared in the hallway, her smile tight but welcoming. "Please come in. Kimberly and Ryan are already here." Kimberly and her husband were waiting in the living room, drinks already in hand. My sister was immaculately dressed as always, her blonde hair styled in a sleek bob, diamonds glinting at her ears and throat. Ryan stood beside her, the perfect corporate husband in pressed chinos and a polo shirt that subtly advertised his country club membership. "Helen." Kimberly air-kissed both my cheeks. "And this must be James. How lovely to meet you." Her tone suggested it was anything but lovely. James, however, stepped forward with perfect composure. "The pleasure is mine, Kimberly. Helen has told me so much about you." "All good things, I hope," she laughed, though her eyes remained cool. "Of course," James replied with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Dinner was an exercise in passive aggression. My mother served her most elaborate dishes, clearly trying to impress James while simultaneously making comments about how simple the meal was. My father asked pointed questions about James's education and career goals, his expression growing increasingly puzzled at James's articulate, thoughtful responses. Kimberly was less subtle. "So, James, have you always been in the service industry?" she asked as we were served the main course. "No, I've had various jobs over the years," James replied mildly. "The cafe suits me for now." "For now," Kimberly echoed with a knowing look at Ryan. "And what are your long-term plans? Career-wise, I mean." "I believe in remaining open to possibilities," James said. "Though I've always been interested in education and social entrepreneurship, similar to Helen's work." "Admirable," Ryan commented in a tone that suggested the opposite. "Though not particularly lucrative fields." "Not everyone measures success in dollars," I interjected, feeling my temper rise. James placed a calming hand on mine under the table. "It's a fair point," he conceded. "Financial security is important. I've been fortunate enough to have options." "Options are always good," my father said. "What does your family do, James?" A brief shadow crossed James's face. "My father was in technology investment. He passed away a few years ago." "I'm sorry to hear that," my mother said, genuinely sympathetic for the first time that evening. "Thank you," James replied, then smoothly changed the subject by complimenting my mother's cooking, launching into a surprisingly knowledgeable discussion about French culinary techniques that momentarily won her over. The rest of the evening continued in much the same vein, with Kimberly and Ryan making subtle digs that James deflected with grace and good humor. By the time we left, I was exhausted from the tension, but James seemed unfazed. "Your family is exactly as you described," he said as we walked back to our hotel. "Though your mother's beef bourguignon was exceptional." I stopped on the sidewalk, turning to face him. "How are you so calm?" "They were horrible to you." James shrugged. "They're protecting you in their way. They don't know me, and from their perspective, I'm not what they want for you. It doesn't bother me because I know what we have is real." I stood on tiptoe to kiss him, overwhelmed with love for this man who could see past my family's rudeness to the misguided concern beneath. "You're remarkable, you know that?" "So I've been told," he said with a wink. "Usually by you." 2 months later, I was coordinating a major fundraising event for my nonprofit. We had spent weeks securing donations for the silent auction, arranging catering, and reaching out to potential donors. James had been incredibly supportive, using his evenings off to help me stuff envelopes and organize name tags. The night of the event, I was a bundle of nerves, checking and rechecking details as guests in cocktail attire began to arrive. James appeared at my side, handsome in a well-cut suit I hadn't seen before. "Everything looks perfect," he assured me. "The turnout is great, and Alyssa says the donation total is already exceeding expectations." "Thank you for being here," I said, squeezing his hand. "It means everything to me." The event was indeed a success. We raised more money than we had dared to hope for, and several major donors expressed interest in ongoing partnerships. As the evening wound down, James led me to a quiet corner of the venue. "I am so proud of you," he said, his eyes shining. "You've worked so hard for this, and you deserve every bit of success." "We couldn't have done it without you," I told him. "Seriously, James, you've been amazing." He took a deep breath and, to my surprise, lowered himself to one knee. "Helen Marshall, you're the most authentic, compassionate, and extraordinary person I've ever known. This past year with you has shown me what real happiness feels like." My heart stopped as he pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. "I want to spend the rest of my life with you, supporting your dreams, sharing your challenges, and building a future together. Will you marry me?" He opened the box to reveal a stunning but tasteful diamond ring. Later, I would learn it had belonged to his grandmother, but in that moment, all I could see was the love in his eyes. "Yes," I whispered, then louder, "Yes, absolutely yes." As he slipped the ring onto my finger and stood to kiss me, the remaining guests burst into applause. Alyssa was openly crying, and Tara was recording the whole thing on her phone, grinning widely. In that perfect moment, I couldn't imagine anything going wrong. But I had yet to tell my family. I waited 2 days to call my parents, wanting to savor the joy of our engagement before facing their reaction. James sat beside me on our couch, holding my hand as I dialed with the speakerphone on. "Mom? Dad? I have some news," I began, trying to keep my voice steady. James proposed, and I said yes. "We're getting married." The silence that followed seemed to stretch for an eternity before my mother spoke. "Oh. Well, congratulations, dear. That's wonderful news." Her tone was carefully modulated, revealing nothing of her true feelings. "When's the big day?" my father asked, practical as always. "We haven't set a date yet," I replied. "We're thinking maybe next spring." "So soon?" My mother sounded alarmed. "But there's so much to plan. The venue, the caterer, the dress. These things take time, Helen." "We want something simple," I explained. "Nothing too elaborate. Simple." She repeated the word as if it were foreign. "Well, I suppose that's sensible, given the circumstances." The conversation continued in this vein, with my parents offering lukewarm congratulations and immediately expressing concerns about logistics. They did not offer to help financially, which didn't surprise me. They had contributed significantly to Kimberly's lavish wedding 5 years earlier, but I knew better than to expect the same. Calling Kimberly was even worse. "Engaged?" "Wow, Helen, that was fast," she said when I broke the news. "Are you sure about this? I mean, you've only known him for what, a year?" "When you know," I replied, echoing what she had said about her own whirlwind engagement to Ryan. "Right, but..." She paused, clearly choosing her words. "Ryan and I came from similar backgrounds, had similar goals. You and James seem so different." "Different doesn't mean wrong," I said firmly. "Of course not," she backpedaled. "I just want you to be sure. Marriage is a big step, especially when there might be financial disparities." I ended the call shortly after, my excitement dampened, but my resolve unchanged. James, who had heard Kimberly's side of the conversation clearly enough, pulled me into a hug. "For what it's worth," He murmured against my hair, "I think you're making an excellent choice in husbands." That made me laugh, as he'd intended. The very best choice, I agreed. We decided on a spring wedding, giving us about 8 months to plan. True to our word. We wanted something meaningful but not extravagant. We found a charming converted warehouse space in Brooklyn that could accommodate our 100 or so guests. We chose a local caterer who specialized in farm-to-table cuisine, selected simple floral arrangements, and agreed that James would wear a nice suit he already owned rather than a tuxedo. The simplicity of our plans seemed to physically pain my mother when I shared the details during our weekly calls. "No seated dinner? Just stations?" she asked incredulously. "And Helen? A warehouse? Surely there must be a proper venue available." "The warehouse is beautiful, Mom. It has exposed brick walls and huge windows. And food stations are more conducive to mingling than a formal dinner." "If you say so," she sighed. "I just don't understand why you won't let us help more. Your father and I would be happy to contribute if you wanted something nicer." "This is exactly what we want," I insisted. "We're paying for it ourselves because it's our day, our way." That was another source of tension. James had suggested we cover the costs ourselves, assuring me he had savings that could handle it. When I expressed concern about draining his accounts, he was evasive. "Don't worry about the money," he said. "I've been careful with what I have. Trust me, we can afford the wedding we want." It was around this time that I began noticing James taking phone calls in private, stepping out of the apartment or speaking in hushed tones. He also mentioned meetings he had to attend, vague business that he never fully explained. When I asked, he would say it was boring financial stuff or just checking in with old contacts. My trust in James was strong, but human nature being what it is, I began to worry. Was he hiding something? Having second thoughts? The secretiveness was so at odds with the openness we'd established in our relationship. One evening, after James had received 3 separate calls and stepped out onto our tiny balcony to take each one, I confronted him. "James, what's going on? You've been so secretive lately. If something's wrong, please tell me." He looked genuinely surprised. "Nothing's wrong, Helen. I promise." "Then why all the private calls? The mysterious meetings? This isn't like you. And it's scaring me." James sat down beside me, taking my hands in his. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to worry you. It's complicated." "Try me," I said, my heart pounding. "Whatever it is, we can figure it out together." He was quiet for a long moment, then said, "It has to do with my family. My background. There are things I haven't told you. Things I've been trying to resolve before the wedding." "What things?" I pressed. "James, you can tell me anything." "I know I can," he said softly. "And I will. But some of it isn't just my story to tell, and I need to sort through some legal matters first." He looked into my eyes. "I come from a complicated family situation. There's money involved. And expectations, and I've been trying to handle it in a way that won't affect us or the life we're building." It wasn't a complete explanation, but it was more than he'd ever revealed before. I could see the sincerity in his eyes, the genuine concern. "I'm not hiding anything that would hurt you," he promised. "I just need a little more time to sort everything out. After the wedding, I'll explain everything. Can you trust me until then?" Part of me wanted to demand answers immediately, to insist on full disclosure before we took our vows. But a larger part recognized that trust wasn't about knowing every detail of someone's life. It was about believing in their character, their intentions, their love. "I trust you," I said finally. "But no more secrets after the wedding, okay?" "No more secrets," he agreed, pulling me close. "Everything will make sense soon, I promise." The months leading up to the wedding flew by in a blur of planning and preparation. My parents visited once to see the venue, my mother's tight smile and my father's furrowed brow making their disapproval clear. Kimberly called regularly with helpful suggestions that inevitably implied our choices were inadequate. "You know, Helen, it's not too late to reconsider the Warrington Hotel," she said 2 months before the wedding. "Ryan knows the events manager there. They had a cancellation for your date, and he could probably get you a decent rate." "We're happy with our venue, Kim," I said for what felt like the 100th time. "But thanks. As the wedding drew closer, Kimberly's concern escalated. She insisted on a lunch where she spent the entire time questioning whether I was making a mistake. "I just don't understand why the rush," she said, pushing her salad around her plate. "If James is really the one, what's the harm in waiting another year? Get to know him better, see if he develops some career ambition. We love each other and want to start our life together," I said, struggling to maintain my patience. "And James has plenty of ambition. It's just not the kind you recognize." "All I'm saying is that marriage is hard enough when you're compatible," she persisted. "When you add financial stress to the mix." "We're not going to have financial stress," I snapped, my temper finally breaking. "And even if we did, I'd rather be happy with James in a tiny apartment than miserable in a mansion with someone I don't love." Kimberly looked genuinely confused. "But why would those be the only options? Why not find someone you love who can also provide financial security?" "Because life isn't a checklist, Kim. Love doesn't work that way." I stood up, throwing some cash on the table for my half of the bill. "I have to go. Some of us have to work for a living." It was a low blow, and I regretted it immediately. But I was tired of defending my choices, my love, my James. The week before the wedding was a whirlwind of final details and arriving guests. Tara and Alyssa threw me a lovely, low-key bachelorette party. James seemed increasingly distracted, still taking mysterious calls, but assuring me everything was fine, just last-minute details he was handling. The night before our wedding, as we lay in bed in our apartment, having rejected the tradition of spending the night apart, James propped himself up on one elbow to look at me. "I love you, Helen Marshall," he said softly. "Tomorrow, you become Helen Carter, and I become the luckiest man alive." "I love you too," I whispered back. "No matter what happens tomorrow with my family, just remember that you're what matters to me. You're my choice, my future." "Tomorrow will be perfect," he promised, drawing me close. "And so will every day after." I fell asleep in his arms, believing him completely. It would be the last peaceful moment before the storm that was Kimberly broke over our perfect day. I woke up on my wedding day with butterflies in my stomach and sunshine streaming through our bedroom window. James had already slipped out, leaving a note on his pillow. "Gone to get breakfast and handle a few last details. See you at 3 o'clock. I'll be the one in the suit, looking like the happiest man alive." Tara arrived at 10 o'clock with coffee and pastries, followed shortly by Alyssa and the hair and makeup artist they had hired as a wedding gift. Our apartment was soon filled with music, laughter, and the chaos of preparation. "Any word from Hurricane Kimberly?" Alyssa asked as the makeup artist worked on her face. "She texted to say she and Ryan are checked into their hotel," I replied. "She's still coming to help me get ready at noon." Tara and Alyssa exchanged a look. "We'll run interference," Tara promised. "If she starts with any negative comments, we'll shut it down." Kimberly arrived precisely at noon, impeccably dressed in a designer pantsuit that probably cost more than my entire wedding budget. She was serving as my reluctant bridesmaid, along with Tara and Alyssa. The venue sent me the final timeline, she announced by way of greeting. "Your hair appointment was supposed to be at 11 o'clock, not noon. We're already behind schedule." "We started at 10 o'clock, I corrected her. "We're right on time." She surveyed the apartment with barely concealed disdain. "Where's your dress? It should be steamed and hanging, not still in the bag." "The steamer is warming up," Alyssa said coolly. "We've got it under control, Kimberly." My sister ignored her, pulling out her phone. "Mom and Dad checked into their hotel. They're heading to the venue at 2 o'clock. Did you confirm the transportation for the bridal party?" "Yes, Kim," I sighed. "The car service is arriving at 2:30. She continued in this vein for the next hour, finding fault with every detail, questioning every decision. I tried to tune her out, focusing instead on the happy butterflies in my stomach and the thought of seeing James at the altar. When I finally stepped into my dress, a simple but elegant A-line with delicate lace detailing, even Kimberly fell momentarily silent. "You look beautiful," she admitted, a flash of genuine emotion crossing her face before her critical expression returned, though a veil would have elevated the look. I don't need a veil, I said, turning to admire the simple pearl hairpins Tara was securing in my updo. This is perfect. The car arrived precisely on time, and we made our way to the venue without incident. The converted warehouse looked magical, with fairy lights strung across the exposed beams. Simple arrangements of wildflowers on the tables, and a small arch of greenery where James and I would say our vows. My father was waiting in the small room we had designated as the bridal suite, looking uncomfortable in his suit. When he saw me, his eyes widened. "Helen," he said, his voice gruff with emotion. "You look lovely." "Thanks, Dad," I replied, surprised and touched by his reaction. He cleared his throat. "Your young man is already here. Seems to be handling the pre-wedding nerves well. James doesn't really get nervous," I said with a smile. My father responded noncommittally. "Well, they're ready for us whenever you are." The ceremony was set to begin at 3:30. At 3:25, guests were being seated, and I was taking deep breaths, preparing to walk down the aisle. My father stood beside me, Kimberly, Tara, and Alyssa arranged in a line before us, ready to precede me to the altar. "Last chance to reconsider," Kimberly whispered, adjusting her bouquet. "Kim," my father warned, surprising me with his defense. The music began. A string quartet playing the gentle melody James and I had selected together. One by one, my bridesmaids walked down the aisle. Then the music changed, signaling my entrance. My father and I stepped into the main space, and I saw James waiting for me, looking handsome and a little awestruck as I approached. Our guests rose to their feet, smiling faces turned toward me. But I had eyes only for James. We were halfway down the aisle when it happened. "This is ridiculous," Kimberly's voice cut through the music. She had moved from her position beside the altar to stand directly in our path. "I can't watch this train wreck without saying something." A collective gasp rippled through the assembled guests. James took a half step forward, his expression concerned but not angry. "Kimberly, please," my father murmured. "Not now." But Kimberly was beyond reason, her face flushed with emotion. "This wedding is a joke," she shouted, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You're marrying a waiter, Helen." "A waiter? How pathetic." The string quartet faltered, then stopped playing entirely. My mother half rose from her seat, her expression mortified. "You could have had anything, anyone," Kimberly continued, her voice breaking. "But you're throwing your life away on someone who can barely support himself, let alone a family. It's embarrassing." I was frozen in shock, unable to form words through the humiliation and rage coursing through me. But James stepped forward calmly, his eyes kind but determined. "Kimberly," he said quietly, "this is Helen's day. Our day. Please don't ruin it with judgments based on assumptions." "Assumptions?" She laughed bitterly. "I'm not assuming anything. I know exactly what you are, and it's not good enough for my sister." "You don't know me at all," James replied, still calm. "I know enough." She turned to the guests. "My sister is marrying a man who serves coffee for a living in a warehouse, with food stations instead of a proper dinner. If that's not settling, I don't know what is." With that final barb, she stormed down the aisle and out the main doors, her heels clicking aggressively on the concrete floor. In the stunned silence that followed, James moved to my side, taking my hand. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. "Should we tell her who I really am?" he whispered, a small smile playing at his lips. I looked into his eyes, saw the love and certainty there, and found my voice. "No," I whispered back. "Let her go. This is our moment." James squeezed my hand, then turned to our shocked guests. "Well," he said with remarkable composure, "that was unexpected. But if you'll bear with us, Helen and I would still very much like to get married today." A ripple of supportive laughter moved through the crowd. The string quartet began playing again, and my father and I continued our journey to the altar, where our officiant waited with a sympathetic smile. The ceremony proceeded beautifully from that point. We exchanged the vows we had written ourselves, promising to support each other's dreams, to face life's challenges together. to always see and appreciate each other for who we truly were. When the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, the applause from our guests seemed especially heartfelt, as if they were not just celebrating our union, but also our dignity in the face of Kimberly's attack. As we moved to the reception area, I noticed James checking his phone with unusual frequency. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Perfect," he assured me. "Just making sure a wedding surprise is on schedule." The reception began with cocktails and past appetizers, guests mingling and tactfully avoiding mention of the ceremony disruption. My mother approached, her expression a mix of embarrassment and concern. "Helen, I am so sorry about Kimberly," she said, clutching her champagne glass too tightly. "I don't know what got into her." "Don't you?" I asked quietly. "She was just saying out loud what you and Dad have been thinking since I introduced you to James." My mother had the grace to look ashamed. "That's not entirely fair. We were concerned, yes. But we would never have humiliated you like that." Before I could respond, there was a commotion at the entrance. Several people in suits entered, followed by a group of elegantly dressed men and women who were definitely not on our guest list. James appeared at my side, his expression unreadable. "Helen," he said, "there are some people I'd like you to meet." He led me toward the newcomers, stopping before a distinguished older couple. The man had James's eyes, the woman his warm smile. "Helen, these are my parents, Richard and Eleanor Carter," James said. "Mom, Dad, this is my wife, Helen." I stared at him in confusion. "Your parents? But you said your father passed away." "I said my father was in technology investment and passed away a few years ago," James corrected gently. "I was referring to my adoptive father, who raised me after my biological parents divorced when I was 8. These are my biological parents, who reconnected with me about 5 years ago." Richard Carter stepped forward, taking my hand. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you, Helen. James has told us so much about you." "I don't understand," I said, looking between James and his parents. "Who are you people?" James led me to a quiet corner, his expression apologetic. "I should have told you everything sooner, but I wanted to be sure you loved me for me, not for my family or my background." "What background?" I asked, still confused. "My father isn't just in technology investment," James explained. "He founded CartTech. You know, the e-commerce platform?" I knew it. Everyone knew it. CartTech was one of the largest technology companies in the world. "My full name is James Richard Carter III," he continued. "When my parents divorced, my mother remarried. And I was raised primarily by my stepfather, taking his name. When he died, I reconnected with my biological father and discovered I was heir to the CartTech fortune." I stared at him, speechless. I was working in the family business, being groomed to take over, when I realized I had no idea who I was outside of the Carter name and money. So I stepped away, moved to New York, and took the cafe job to experience normal life, to figure out what I really wanted. He took my hands in his. "And then I met you, and for the first time, someone loved me for myself. Not for my bank account or my family connections. So all this time," I began, "I've been working with my father to establish an education foundation," James finished. "Those phone calls, those meetings, they were about setting up the foundation and figuring out how to tell you the truth without making you feel deceived." I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "So you're not a waiter?" "I am a waiter," he said with a smile. "I'm also the future CEO of CartTech and the co-founder of the Carter Education Initiative. But most importantly, I'm your husband, who loves you exactly as you are and knew you loved me the same way." Before I could respond, there was another commotion at the entrance. Kimberly had returned, her expression still stormy. She stopped short when she saw the elegant newcomers, her eyes widening as she recognized Richard Carter, whose face occasionally appeared in business magazines and news segments. "What is going on?" she demanded, approaching us. "Who are all these people?" James turned to face her, his arm around my waist. "Perfect timing, Kimberly. I was just about to make an announcement." He led me back to the center of the room, tapping a spoon against his champagne glass to gain everyone's attention. "Friends and family," he began. Thank you all for being here to celebrate our marriage. There's something I'd like to share with you all, especially those who might have concerns about my ability to provide for Helen." The room fell silent, all eyes on James. "My name is James Richard Carter III," he said clearly. "Some of you may recognize my father, Richard Carter, founder of CartTech. While I've enjoyed my time working at the cafe where I met Helen, my primary occupation for the past year has been establishing the Carter Education Initiative, a foundation dedicated to improving educational access for underprivileged communities." A murmur ran through the crowd. My mother's champagne glass nearly slipped from her fingers. My father stood frozen, his expression stunned. And Kimberly's face had drained of all color. I chose not to share this information earlier because I wanted to be sure that the people in my life, especially my wife, valued me for who I am, not what I have. James smiled down at me. Helen loved me when she thought I was just a waiter with too many books and not enough shelf space. That's how I know our marriage will last, regardless of my bank balance. He raised his glass. To my beautiful bride, who sees people for who they are, not what they own or what titles they hold. I love you, Helen Carter. As our guests raised their glasses in toast, I saw Kimberly slip quietly toward the exit, her perfect posture finally crumbling under the weight of her humiliation. The party continued, now with an added air of excitement, as our guests processed the revelation. James introduced me to colleagues and friends who had arrived late, explaining in whispered asides how each had been part of his real life while he was living his temporary one. "Are you angry?" he asked when we finally had a moment alone. "I'm processing," I admitted. "I understand why you didn't tell me, but I wish you'd trusted me sooner." "I trusted you with my heart from the beginning," he said. "The money and the name, that's just circumstance. But I am sorry for the deception." I looked up at him, this man I had married, this stranger I knew better than anyone. "No more secrets," I said firmly. "No more secrets," he agreed, sealing the promise with a kiss. The remainder of the reception passed in a blur of congratulations, introductions to people from James's other life, and moments of adjustment as I processed the revelation of who my husband really was. James remained attentive and grounded throughout. The same man I had fallen in love with despite the dramatic change in context. As the evening was winding down, I spotted Kimberly hovering near the dessert table, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. She had changed from her bridesmaid dress into an elegant evening gown, clearly having planned to return to the reception all along, perhaps to gloat over my mistake. "I should talk to her," I told James, who nodded supportively. "Want me to come with you?" he offered. "No, this needs to be sister to sister." I approached Kimberly, who was now pretending great interest in a small chocolate tart. When she saw me, she straightened, attempting to regain her usual composure. "Quite the plot twist," she said, forcing a light tone. "You might have mentioned your waiter boyfriend was actually James Carter." "I didn't know," I replied honestly. James kept his background private for reasons that should be obvious now. Kimberly had the grace to look slightly abashed. Well, it was certainly effective. "I've never been so mortified in my life." "That wasn't his intention," I said. "Or mine. But honestly, Kim, what possessed you to cause a scene like that at my wedding?" She looked away, setting down her untouched dessert. "I don't know. I couldn't understand why you would settle for what seemed like so much less than you deserved. It felt like you were deliberately throwing away every advantage we were raised to pursue." "It wasn't about settling," I explained. "It was about choosing what actually makes me happy rather than what looks impressive to others." I realized that now, she admitted. "Though it's certainly convenient that what makes you happy turned out to be one of the richest men under 40. I stepped back, stung by the implication. "That's not fair. I had no idea who James really was when I fell in love with him. That was the whole point." Kimberly sighed, her defensive posture softening slightly. "I know. That's what makes it so. I don't know. Ironic? Perfect? You rejected everything our parents taught us about success and status, and yet somehow ended up with more of both than I have, despite doing everything right." For the first time, I saw past my sister's perfect facade to the insecurity beneath. Kimberly, who had always seemed so confident in her choices, so certain of her path, was questioning whether she had built her life on the right foundation. "This isn't a competition, Kim," I said gently. "My happiness doesn't diminish yours. And James's money doesn't validate my choices any more than Ryan's success validates yours. The only question that matters is whether you're happy with your life." "Of course I'm happy," she said automatically, but her eyes told a different story. "Are you? Because sometimes it seems like you're more concerned with appearing successful than actually enjoying your success." Kimberly was silent for a long moment. "It's not that simple," she finally said. "When you spend your whole life working towards specific goals, following a certain path, it's hard to admit if that path isn't leading where you thought it would." "It's never too late to change direction," I told her. "But either way, I need you to respect my choices from now on. What you did today was unacceptable, regardless of James's true identity." "I know," she said, looking genuinely remorseful. "I'm sorry, Helen. I was wrong. And I embarrass myself far more than I embarrassed you." "I forgive you," I said after a moment. "But things need to be different between us going forward. No more judgment, no more competition. Just sisters who want the best for each other, whatever that looks like." Kimberly nodded, then surprised me by pulling me into a tentative hug. "Your dress really is beautiful," she whispered. "And so is your husband, with or without his family fortune." It wasn't a complete reconciliation, but it was a start. As Kimberly moved away to find Ryan, my parents approached, looking slightly shell-shocked. My father cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Helen, your mother and I owe you an apology," he began. "We've been less than supportive of your relationship with James. Because you thought he was just a waiter, I finished for him." "Yes," my mother admitted. "And that was wrong of us. We should have trusted your judgment and seen what you saw in him, regardless of his occupation." "Would you be apologizing if he had turned out to be just a waiter?" I asked, already knowing the answer. My parents exchanged a guilty look. "We'd like to think so," my father said. "But honestly, probably not immediately. It might have taken us longer to recognize our mistake." His honesty was surprising and, in its way, refreshing. "At least you can admit it," I said. "That's something. We're very happy for you." "Helen," my mother said, squeezing my hand. "And we're looking forward to getting to know James better, the real James. He's the same person he's always been," I reminded them. "The only difference is now you're willing to see it." They nodded, acknowledging the truth in my words. We talked a little longer, my parents asking questions about James's foundation and our plans for the future. It wasn't a perfect conversation, but it was more genuine than any we'd had in years. As the reception came to a close, James and I said goodbye to our guests and prepared to leave for our honeymoon. A 2-week trip to Italy that I now realized would be very different from the budget vacation I had been expecting. "Ready to go, Mrs. Carter?" James asked, helping me into my going-away outfit. A simple white dress that would be comfortable for travel. "That still sounds strange," I admitted. "I'm not sure I'll ever get used to it. The name, or being married to a secret billionaire?" he teased. "Both, I think." I turned to face him. "James, promise me something." "Anything," he said instantly. "Promise me we'll still live in the real world. That we won't isolate ourselves in some bubble of wealth and privilege." I fell in love with a man who appreciated simple pleasures and valued meaningful work. I don't want to lose that or him. James took my hands in his. "That's exactly why I fell in love with you. You keep me grounded, Helen. You remind me what really matters." He kissed me softly. "We'll find the right balance. The foundation will keep us connected to real issues, real people. And while I can't promise we won't upgrade our apartment a bit, we don't need a mansion or a yacht or any of the trappings my father thinks are essential. A slightly bigger bookshelf would be nice, though," I conceded with a smile. "I think we can manage that." We said our final goodbyes and slipped out to the waiting car, which I was only mildly surprised to discover was a sleek town car rather than the taxi I had expected. As we pulled away from the venue, James's phone buzzed with a text message. "The jet is ready whenever we are," he said casually. "The jet," I repeated. "As in private jet?" James looked sheepish. "Is that too much?" We can fly commercial if you prefer. I laughed, feeling the last of the tension from the day dissolve. No, I think for a honeymoon, a private jet is acceptable. But when we get back, we're going to have a long talk about what normal life looks like for us going forward. Deal, he agreed, pulling me close. As long as we're together. The details don't matter. 6 months later, James and I had settled into a new normal. We had moved to a larger apartment in Brooklyn, not ostentatious but comfortable. With plenty of bookshelves and a spare room, we were converting into a home office. James had taken a more active role at CartTech while continuing to develop the education foundation. And I had accepted a position as the foundation's executive director, bringing my experience in nonprofit education to help shape its mission and programs. Kimberly and I were slowly rebuilding our relationship on more honest terms. She had admitted that her marriage to Ryan was struggling under the weight of appearances and expectations. And they had started couples counseling. My parents were making an effort to value substance over status, though old habits died hard. As for James and me, we were finding our way together. Balancing privilege with purpose, comfort with conscience. Some days it was challenging, navigating between two worlds, but most days it felt like exactly the life we were meant to live. Any regrets? James asked one evening as we sat on our balcony, watching the sunset over the Brooklyn skyline. About marrying you? Never, I replied honestly. About not knowing the whole truth sooner? Sometimes. But I understand why you kept it from me, and in a way, it was a gift. How many people can say they know with absolute certainty that they're loved for themselves, not their circumstances? James smiled, reaching for my hand. That's how I see it too. A gift we gave each other without even realizing it. I leaned my head on his shoulder, content in the knowledge that our love story, unconventional as it was, had taught us both what truly mattered. Not wealth or status or family approval, but finding someone who sees you clearly and loves you completely, someone who helps you become the best version of yourself. In the end, that was the real fortune we had found in each other, worth more than any inheritance or corporate empire. And it was one we intended to treasure for the rest of our lives. So that's my story. And I want to know, have you ever been judged unfairly by family members who thought they knew what was best for you? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if you enjoyed hearing about how my sister got the reality check of a lifetime, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more stories. Thank you all for watching. And remember that true love sees beyond appearances to the heart of who you really are.